All right, everyone, if I can welcome you all to this first panel here in the auditorium. I think we still have some folks streaming in from the coffee break, but we'll try and make a start because the future waits for no one, right? So we want to make sure that there's at least some element of punctuality in getting this going. Welcome to this panel. We're very excited about the topic that we're going to explore today. My name is Maniam. I am currently a fellow of practice at the Blavatnik School of Government at Oxford University, where I teach on both technology and futures. Previously, I was a civil servant in Singapore working on a range of issues, but the best job I did, I think, was working on how to do good long-term planning at what we now call the Center for Strategic Futures. I've been very used to dealing with futures at the national governmental level. And in conversations with some of the organizers here at the Dubai Futures Foundation, we were thinking about how we look at where futures is being done in more unexpected places. And one idea that we cottoned on to was, what happens when you look at futures beyond the national? What happens when you look at what's going on in foresight at the multilateral or the global level, but also at the hyper-local level? And that's what today's panel is going to be about. I am so pleased to be able to welcome three wonderful speakers, all doing really interesting experiments and innovations with futures at many levels beyond the national. Antonio Mazzeo, immediately to my left, is president of the Regional Council of Tuscany, thinking a lot about the future of his region within Italy. Zainab Kakal works at the UNDP, Pacific offices, thinking about how we take futures into the regional. And Kenneth Nsah, with the UNESCO-MOST Bridges Coalition, is thinking about how we bring futures deep into local government and also local communities. So we're in for a real treat, I think, as we think about how exactly we push the boundaries of futuring here. And what I've done with each of our speakers is I've asked them to, we'll dispense with long introductions. You've all got their bios online. But what we will do is I've asked them to give us a short introduction, just 2 to 3 minutes or so, of their favorite story where futures is being applied in their work. So, Antonio, if you don't mind, let's start with you on this. Tell us a bit about what's going on in Tuscany, and then we'll work our way down the panel.
Buongiorno, salam alaikum. Thank you for inviting me here. Thank you, it's a great pleasure for me. It's a pleasure to show and to explain about our new experiment and how I use it foresight for Tuscany. All of you know Tuscany as a land rich of art, history, culture, beauty. But Tuscany is also a land, a big innovation. I just named two, Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo Galilei, but also other people that changed the world. And so at the start of this legislature, with our colleagues that are here with mine, we decided to think how will be the Tuscany in 25 years. And so we gave ourselves a challenge to continue with our historical idea, but also we have a goal, a very important goal. We want to become the most innovative region in Europe. This is not simple, but this is our goal. And so to those this, we launched a big project. The name of the project is Tuscany 2050. And in this project, we'll not try and guess will happen in the next 25 years, but we will base about our experience how Tuscany will organize our job, our idea. So we anticipate the hopes, the needs, the expectation of the young people. You know that the future, we will have a future, and this future is not the same. We have to choose what is the desirable future for us. And so to choose what is the right way, we organize our job in 3 times. The first one, with 15 highly representative people of our region. I don't know, very different, urban planners, doctors, scientists, architects, professor. There is here the coordinator of this group, that is the Professor Paolo Dario, is here with me. But also, on the other end, we organize our job and we meet a lot of young people. You saw a very different view of the world from these important group of highly representative people and the haze of the young people. They are digital natives, and they have another point of view on the world. And the last one, we asked to artificial intelligence how artificial intelligence will see the Tuscany through its eyes, the future of our community. And so we make a video, and now I want to show you what is the point of view of intelligence artificial.
Welcome to the Tuscany of 2050, a land that lives in harmony with its glorious past, its history and roots, which looks with ambition and hope to the future. We need to rethink how our cities will satisfy people's lives and allow them to live in an ecological way, respecting the environment in a new world with clean and renewable energy. Agriculture has become a model of sustainability. Our traditions are mixed with innovation, creating a diverse ecosystem in which people can flourish. Crops are managed using techniques that preserve biodiversity, ensuring fresh and healthy produce. Our communities are united with a shared vision, a future in which social and environmental well-being is central to our lives. More efficient and faster transport systems that are safer and accessible for all. In Tuscany 2050, we will celebrate our rich history, our art, our culture, while embracing change. With every step we make, it's a step to a better future where the beauty of our land remains intact. Come with us on this journey to the future. We will make it together. We will build it together, and we will live in it together.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonio. You know you're in for a treat when someone mentions Galileo, Leonardo da Vinci, and AI all in the first 3 minutes of a panel, right? So we're in good shape for today. Zainab, no pressure on you, of course, but tell us a bit about what's going on in the Pacific region, particularly given your work with the UNDP.
Thanks, Aaron, and thank you, everyone, for choosing to be here and allowing us to contribute. So as Aaron was saying, I work with one of the UN agencies, UN Development Program, and I'm based out of Fiji, where I've lived for the last 5 years. And it's very confusing for me to dress up in this weather because I'm hot and cold at the same time. Having said that, so I want to share a story from the country of Vanuatu. For those of you who do not know where that is a small island nation in the South Pacific. And this story comes from around 2021, 2022. We were working with the ministry on one of their 5-year strategies, as you would do. And this is, again, in my role, I support a lot of these countries on their foresight journeys. So this is one of the times where we have detractors, we have skeptics, and all kinds of people that you deal with. So this is exactly that space. And within that space, we were doing 2 things. One, that we were doing a lot of collaborative consultations in the spirit of doing participatory inclusive work, which is extremely critical if you want to do foresight at a national level. And one of the things that emerged out of that process was when we were describing the methodology that we wanted to use, we had our government counterparts say, that sounds very similar to the Nsah concept. So Nsah is a concept from Vanuatu, which is 400 years old. It's a traditional governance system in which you essentially do consensus building with everyone together. And for me, the huge takeaway from that was that very often, especially I wear an innovation hat sometimes, and very often the things that we are speaking to people with the lens of the new is very often grounded in something that's real for people already. And we very often in the world of foresight talk about how do we land this in the context. And this is a classic case of ownership in a different kind of way. I think the other thing that I'd like to share with this example alone was we worked with 4 directors on key concepts in their ministries, right? So like data security, decentralization, labor mobility. These are key issues for the country of Vanuatu. And each director was working on a foresight brief. And as always, when you do this kind of scanning process, a bunch of wild cards come up, right? So one of the wild cards was that, okay, we'll have twin cyclones, one cyclone after the other, which essentially means that you have 0 time for recovery. So you've had a cyclone, 0 recovery, then you have another one. And then they said, oh, one of the other things that was, another wild card was that we'll have a security hack and all the government systems will be down. And orderly, as we always do with wildcards, we pay attention to them on the side. But in this case, everything they thought would happen happened in the next 6 months. So within a month and a half, they had 2 cyclones and a data hack, which brought down the entire country for 1 week. So you couldn't get passports, you couldn't get, basically couldn't get anything done. And I think that this story for me also speaks a lot about the importance of wildcards. Especially when we think about, that's not possible. And I think it also goes back to why it's important to be ambitious, just like Antonio was saying with what Tuscany is thinking about, or even in the morning when our panelists were talking about not being restrained by our imagination, not only in terms of possibilities, but also in terms of risks. So maybe I'll stop there, and Aaron, back to you.
Great, Zainab, thank you so much. And I was very struck by your story about how everything happened in 6 months, right? Even though you thought that it might take a much longer time. There's a great line from Antony and Cleopatra, the Shakespeare play, "Nature wants strange forms to vie with fancy. Reality also wants strange forms to vie with fancy," because sometimes reality can't quite keep up, or rather reality bites us, right, in the back when we think we've got it all figured out, which is exactly why processes like foresight, right, and the kind of reperceiving that it allows becomes so critical. Ken, let's come to you now. Tell us a bit about what you do in Cameroon and what your favorite example is, of hyper-local futures.
Yeah, so I wear many caps. I hope that they may come through as I speak. But most recently, I've been doing some work on the features of the Congo Basin, which is the 2nd largest tropical rainforest in the world, but actually the highest carbon sink now. So it's 2nd in size after the Amazon, but it's 1st in capacity to sequestrate carbon now. So with support from SWAF and the University of Cologne, I've been doing some work on the features of that Congo Basin. And within that, so we've been working across a number of thematics, but there is one that really stands out to me, perhaps because also of my circumstances of birth, which is that we worked not only maybe on the futures of agriculture, the futures of security and minerals and wars and etc., but there was something that was touching me more personally, something we call royal animals. In Cameroon, royal animals would be, for example, not all of Cameroon anyway, because Cameroon is a very diversified country with about 300 sub-nationalities, one would say. So, and we have some of them are quite centralized, powerful kingdoms, like the one where I come from, that predate colonization. So these animals like lions, tigers, elephants, cowries, etc., are used by royalty for different purposes. For example, in the past, this thing that I'm wearing, so some of this would be made with the teeth of maybe tigers and lions. And then also the kings would sit and put their feet on the skin of lions and tigers to signify their power. Or we use feathers from a bird, we call it the Bannerman's Turaco. We use the red feather to give epaulets, to give ranks to people and titles. We use the porcupine. But these animals are all critically endangered, and most of them are on the red list of the IUCN. And even within a local environmental protection laws in Cameroon, you're not supposed to catch them. But however, in these communities that I come from, and I'm royalty in my own community, if you catch this animal and you bring it to the palace, you are awarded a title. So, and then it was so difficult because it's so difficult to talk about such a topic, especially from outside. It would look like you are attacking a long-standing institution. So what I did is that then I brought in some of the kings in my community, in that part of Cameroon where I come from, through the Northwest Regional House of Kings. So I brought in these kings together with other participants, and we were able to collectively imagine what would be the futures of the traditions and the cultures that they are custodians of if these animals go completely extinct. So how do we strike a balance between keeping the traditions alive but also protecting this critical biodiversity? And it was very, very amazing. It was mind-blowing, the contributions that came out in the room, but also from the kings themselves, including then what we did is that at the end of the session, then we drafted a series of recommendations. And then with these recommendations are going to be forwarded to the environmental protection ministries in the country and will also be published. But what I like about this is that then now that there is buy-in from the kings, automatically the populations are definitely going to buy in from there, because very often in these local settings, in these local indigenous settings, people respect the laws of the indigenous laws more than they respect the laws of the state. So that means that we are in a good direction with this kind of work. And also, even just to prove that they were so satisfied, the kings, they made me their ministerial ambassador. So they called me Khum Tum Foing, which means a kind of a minister and royal messenger.
Very interesting. You know what's very striking about what all three of you have talked about is the importance of history, actually, right? I mean, this is a panel and a whole forum on the future, but so much of what you're describing is actually what we can learn from the past, right? Ancient practices, tribal wisdoms, indigenous practice. Zainab's actually doing a workshop on Thursday morning on indigenous futures, so shout out for that. If you haven't signed up, that is a mistake. I would strongly suggest going to do that. Apologies to the organizers if now it is utterly overcrowded on Thursday. But it's worth thinking about, right? Because there's something different here that we may not always be able to take from when we take very macro or very national perspectives. So this leads to a question I was going to pose to all of you now, which is, how is your work actually different from the foresight that many of us are more familiar with? Foresight that either takes place in national or city-level governments, or foresight in the boardroom, right? The last time I was sitting on this stage, we were actually talking about foresight in the boardroom, so shout out to, I know I have at least one fellow panelist who's here. But tell us a bit about how your work is different from that. Maybe, Zainab, we can start with you on this one and work our way down.
For those of you who are not familiar with the Pacific, right? When I say Pacific, what does that actually mean? So if you have a globe and you turn it around, the half of the globe is the Pacific, right? And we're used to seeing one map which is Eurocentric. But if you if you grew up in Australia or Japan, you'd see a completely different map, right? And that's the Pacific. And when you basically throw a stone in any direction and ask people what does that actually mean, for a lot of people that includes New Zealand and Australia. For some people that includes Papua New Guinea and Timor-Leste. For some people they would say, oh, that's like Northern Pacific, Southern Pacific. Some people would say it's Melanesia, Micronesia, Polynesia. So it depends on how you slice and dice a region. You're also slicing and dicing like colonial histories, geopolitical tensions. And the reason I'm sharing this with you is that a lot of my work is centered around thinking about the Pacific region. And in this case, I think when we're doing foresight work, you need a unifying identity. But you need a unifying identity which can also hold the diversity. So you don't want to unify in a reductive way. You want to unify in a way that actually allows people to see themselves in it. And that's a huge, I think it's an experiment in framing. And one of the things that emerging concept in the Pacific is that of a Pacific household. So very often we talk about the Pacific family. And in the Pacific family, there is a Pacific household. And that household is very unique. Like each one of us, we come from a different household and it's unique. But I think together we make the Pacific family. And that's and the reason I'm sharing that is because I think that framing makes such a huge difference, because you could do things at the regional level or like hyper-local level, or even at like half the globe level, but for people to see themselves in it and make it their own is extremely important. And the Pacific household is one example of how that is possible, especially because people in this time, I think we all need to not only see ourselves in it, but also our future generations. People need to be able to see themselves in it, otherwise it's fiction.
No, thank you for that, Zainab. You talked about this issue of your family, household, and what you're getting at there really is the underlying metaphor, right, for what and how we define ourselves. Yeah. What is it we're using there? And the next panel will be all about learning from global practice, moderated by Sohail and Ayatollah, who actually developed the whole notion of causal layered analysis, the underpinning of which is the metaphor that we use. And I think those metaphors are actually critical, right? Because if we change our metaphors for the future, all sorts of new ways of seeing start to emerge. Even a family, a family can be a very functional metaphor, or it can be a site of intrigue and deception and not always desirable qualities. So I think the more we push ourselves here and our metaphors change, the better our conception of the future becomes. Ken, metaphors matter to you as well, given that you're a creative writer and poet. Ken made the mistake of telling me this when we did our kind of preparatory call earlier. But tell us how your metaphors are working then and how your work is different from other kind of levels of foresight.
So let me start with a metaphor that I would call the rhizomatic. I think my approach is more rhizomatic. I'm borrowing this from eco-criticism, one of the fields in which I work, because I take a whole of society, a whole of government, and a whole of community or community-based whole of society approach to the way that I do foresight, and also because of the different affiliations that I bear, whether it is the work that we do in SWAV and bridges to support the implementation. First of all, we were supporting the drafting of the declaration, and now that we have the declaration, we are working towards supporting the implementation of the declaration of future generations. And I'm also the chair of a new commission in my community that in the Kingdom of Nsah that has been created for future generations and sustainability. So whether you take that dimension or you take the dimension of the Congo Basin work, in general, what is very clear is that the work is work that straddles a lot of borders, whether they are linguistic, geographical, cultural boundaries. For example, issues around sustainable development, around climate change mitigation in the Congo Basin covers about 6 countries. Okay, now, and most of these issues are issues that don't respect national boundaries. So there is no way you can walk around these issues without crossing these. So most of the boundaries that we really talk about, whether they are corporate boundaries or they are national boundaries, are actually just human artificial inventions that don't exist in reality. Because biodiversity, when it is crossing from Gabon to Cameroon, it doesn't care. It doesn't need to have a passport or an ID card. So the same thing happens if you pollute air in Cameroon and it wants to cross into the Republic of Chad, it doesn't have to stop by and hear what the security are saying. So it's important to have this global approach to the foresight work that all of us do, especially if we are working around issues like climate change, around issues like biodiversity, and also future generations.
Brilliant. Right. So global and rhizomatic. I think that's one of those we can take, as a metaphor for where we go next. The horizontal connections, right, that we get to play with. Antonio, tell us a bit about your work and how that varies from other forms of foresight.
Thank you. We use a different model because we want to base it on our people, not traditional or mathematical models, but we start from our people, and they ask to think the future about her ace. And so we give a big word that is well-being. We start this project, think that in the future, Tuscany will be the land of well-being. And so they asked, what do you think? In which way we can change? And ask them to think about what change would be needed to reach this objective from different perspectives. I don't know. I say, how will our city change? How will our culture change? How will our healthcare change? And so you imagine that we have a lot of very interesting feedback. I make only, for the time, 3 or 4 examples. First one, everyone knows our wonderful Tuscan wines. But I think that nobody knows that if you want the same wine, we have to change the production. We have to change in higher altitudes because climatic change, also in Tuscany, it's very impacted. Yeah. In the second one, I think the city that are on coast of the Tuscany the rise levels of the sea now change the city, and also the urban planner have to think other city near the coast of Italy. Or we have a big problem in Europe, but also in Tuscany, that is demographic law. What's happened? Now we have 24% of people that are more than 65 years. In 2050, we will have 35% of people that are more than 65 years, and we have 10% less population than now, and it will be a great problem. So we asked how artificial intelligence can reverse demographics in this. And the last one, healthcare, that for us it's very important. How we will personalize medicine based on DNA. We were studying about it. I think that we will change because in the future, the cost of medicine will be double in 2015 than now. This is the model that we used, and now we have a lot of very interesting answers to our question that change also the political vision of the next year. It's not simple because politics and politicians think to brief period in Europe and in Tuscany, in brief period. This is a change of mind, very important. It was not simple, but now we start another life for Tuscany, I'm sure.
And that's hard to do, right? Because moving people out of the incentives of the timeframes that they deal with is never a simple one to operate. So thank you very much, for that reminder. I wanted to probe all three of you on one last thing. In the previous panel, which Patrick moderated, they talked a little bit about metadisciplinarity, right? The idea of how much we need to learn from multiple domains, multiple themes, multiple sets of issues. And it strikes me in all of your descriptions that you all have to be quite voracious learners. You have to be magpies and collect lots of different things, bring the ideas together, and see how they translate into interesting futures. Where are you getting your deepest learning at the moment? You've all talked about history, you've talked a little bit about literature, you've talked about tribal cultures, but where are you getting your deepest insights at the moment in terms of particular disciplines? I think a group like ours especially will be interested to learn where you are going to for your learning. And maybe on this one, we can start with Antonio again.
Okay, but as you know, Tuscany is a land of poetry, inventors, engineers. Is a land in which this different point of view it's still used also now. For us, it's very important to have a different point of view when we decide. When we involve the 15 highly representative person of Tuscany, we chose different point of view. A doctor, a chef, urban planner, a scientist, and this different point of view are a melting pot. They move together and they give a different point of view. But for us, I said before that the key of our project are new generation. I was born in the south of Italy, not in Tuscany. I came in Tuscany for study in 1996, and we had no smartphone in 1996. We have no fast internet connection. I speak with my parents not every day, but now we are connected with the world. So 1996 from now are 27 years. It's the same time from now to 2050. And so for us, it's important that people that are involved, their point of view very different, because only if you have point of view very different, you can organize a future, a better future from people. I won't take only an example. I went to the school to meet younger people, and when I asked what is the future, if you speak with the people of the primary school, you have a very different answer if you speak with the people of the secondary school. They have an idea of the world that is very, very different, and they saw the change of the world in a different point of view. And it's one of the best experiments that I have in my political activity, because they are more than us. This is very, very interesting. And I hope that you try to make the same one, because you come back at home with a great answer.
I would definitely agree with that, actually. The best workshops I've ever done in futures have always been with kids either in primary school or lower secondary, like 13 or 14. They have the most elastic imaginations, and they can see all sorts of different possibilities. So thank you for that reminder, to talk to young people as a source of innovation. Zainab?
I'm tempted, it's interesting that I go next, because I'm tempted to say that talk to your grandmoms.
It's fine. We like disagreement on panels. This is great. Yep.
I think when I think about the different disciplines that inspire me, I think my personal interest also in foresight is that my own imagination of who I could be. And I think even that sometimes is hard. I don't know about you. Maybe you guys are really good at it. But I would struggle because I have restraints on my own imagination. And of course, that has repercussions on my own practice, because I should be able to serve the governments that I work with in a better way. I think it's also like a switch on, switch off button a little bit. And my button switched on 5 years back. And since then, I see it everywhere. So if I'm investing, I think about compounding. And I was like, OK, that's what foresight work is like. It actually compounds. And then if I'm like reading a biography, it suddenly tells me a little bit about, okay, what's happening now with cell phones and young kids is maybe not different from what happened with TV and young kids then. And I just like, and I think there's so much to learn from everywhere. Like I got my driving license, for instance, 20 years back, and it doesn't expire till 2047. Yeah, and isn't that incredible? Yeah, I mean, someone's like sitting in Bombay, in India, stamping something, it says 2047. To me, that's incredible. That's incredible. And so I just feel like there's just so many lessons to learn everywhere. And I think like discussions like this and forums like this open that. I think in the morning session where someone talked about window versus mirror, right? And the difference between window and mirror is just silver, and I think it's just about silvering. Everything can get you there, and that's the beauty of it.
The question I find myself asking is, will you even need driver's licenses in 2047? Right? Or should we be giving licenses to some kind of artificial intelligence at that point? Ken, where are you learning from?
Yeah, as Zainab rightly said, I think there is so much to learn from everywhere. And in my case, I believe that my work is very transdisciplinary and multidisciplinary. Given my background in language and literary studies and teaching. But I think I want to stick to two things here. I draw the most of inspiration, I would say, or I find great synergies, I could also say it that way, between literary creativity and foresight, especially in the African context, where we have evidence, or we have a long track record of using literature for mobilization, whether it is theater for development, whether it is spoken poetry, whether it is the Chinua Achebes and the Ngugi wa Thiong'os or the Chimamandas who are writing to reclaim or defend their African identities. So I think there is this synergy between foresight and these kinds of literary traditions of mobilizing the arts and creativity for sensitization, because in some contexts it works with maybe doing foresight work and then drafting policy briefs and handing them over to politicians. But if we want to empower communities, then we need to look for playful ways of engaging them. And I think that is where literature is so powerful and also helpful in the sense of creating artifacts from the future and making it more concrete and relatable. The last one I would also highlight is the learnings from my indigenous Nsah culture. For instance, in my culture, the past is actually, the future is in my back. So I'm facing my past and giving my back to the future. So if I were to give the word, if I say Anankeinsambi, when I say Anankeinsambi, that actually means before, in the past, but Mbi means in front of me. So it means that the past is very knowable, and the future is quite unknowable. So that prepares me for uncertainties of the future. And it also gives me concepts like a wook, because a wook is a concept about precaution. What are the limits to creativity? What are the limits to imagination? Because when we imagine what should not be imagined, do we really think it was good to have imagined making the atomic bomb? I will leave it there.
That was a masterclass in futuring right there, you know. Pose the question and then leave the group to figure out what it needs to do. So thank you very much, Ken. No, that was really thought-provoking. And I want to just push us a little bit more now, because you know, I was chatting with some friends over breakfast, so shout out to the three of you who will remain unnamed to protect the guilty. But we were all agreed that, you know, often at these types of events, we talk a lot about the successes, but not enough about what goes wrong and what the failures are that require us to be vulnerable and humble and continually open to learning. So I'm going to ask the three of you now, when have you failed, right? And what did you learn from that experience in doing foresight at whatever level that you're working on? Ken, maybe we can start with you on this one, and then we'll work our way back.
I think my work is relatively new. A lot of you here have more experience in foresight per se than me. So I think that one of my greatest, because it's not too early for me to evaluate the failures, I would say, but I think one of the failures, or I really feel deeply disappointed that my physical workshops on the Congo Basin have taken place in only one of 6 countries. And I feel that that is not enough. That is very insignificant, because then, although, yeah, that's Central Africa, that's Sub-Saharan Africa, but there are contextual differences and insights that would be more helpful to draw upon. And sometimes, given limitations in terms of internet access, in terms of erratic energy supply or cuts of electricity, then the online method, because I do mixed methods, online workshops, but also on-the-ground workshops, quite often the online workshops don't really work for the population that I'm targeting in the Congo Basin country. So that I think I would limit myself to this more or less for now in terms of failures or what I feel disappointed about.
Yeah. And failures are just the flip side of learning, right? So really what I'm asking you here is, when have you learned from that and managed to do some constructive flipping, I guess, of the whole experience?
Yeah.
Zainab, did you want to
Yeah,
add
I just wanted to quickly add that immediately I was doing online workshops, I realized this handicap, and I had preempted it. And that is why I then had to mobilize additional funding to be able to do the on-the-ground workshops that I did in Cameroon.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so just remembering the online versus in-person sort of dynamics and how that works. Great. Zainab.
I think we, in our foresight practice, we are pretty much failing on a daily basis. And I think the way we think about it is like failing up or failing forward. So I want to be, my aim, and I have someone from my team here, Marissa, and my aim, she knows that, is that I want to be humbled on a daily basis. Because I think this entire practice is about coming at it with curiosity and coming at it with learning. And I think particularly I'll talk about one, I mean, when I was sharing this story of Vanuatu as well, it's not particularly a story of, it's not a story I would share often because it is a story of learning. But even in this case, I think very often we do futuring work or visioning work, and you know, it's very nice to stretch our time horizons. And I've seen some things go very, very wrong with that as well, especially because as intelligent people, we have a great sort of like there's something about intelligent, smart people and doomsday and despair. Like they just like attract each other. So like how do you actually instill pragmatic optimism in our thinking? And when we're talking to small island nations about 2075, when some of them may or may not exist in their current form, what would that inquiry then look like? I mean, we can't go into it thinking that, okay, so what will, you know, let's do personas. So yeah, I think literally all of this is learning, and I think going back to what Nsah was talking about is that one of my biggest learnings has been that while we use the best of what is foresight practice, as we understand as practitioners, we have to put that together with what is local methods of research, or how people understand, do data collection, what is reciprocity in terms of working with people, what kind of responsibilities from an ethics perspective we have towards them, and then we have to do another layer of actually adding a component on what is perhaps indigenous wisdom and knowledge, what are practices, concepts that are already used, because I think there's so much, just like Nsah was saying, in the Pacific as well, talking about time is a bit silly. Like, I mean, I'm from the outside, I'm from India, right? People look at me and like, they'll maybe laugh a little bit, not on my face because they're nice, but they are later. And they do that because the concept of time isn't linear. So then it goes back to essentially the future is in the past and same concepts. And and I think the only way to, I think the way is to navigate different methods, tools, etc., to arrive at something that, in a way, superimposes all these layers into something genuinely useful.
Great. No, thank you very much, Zainab. What you described actually suggests to me that actually all foresight in the first iteration must fail, right? Because if you do it well, and if you are truly poking and prodding at a system, and having it revisit its assumptions and deeply held views, then you're bound to have some kind of violent reaction. Well, hopefully not violent in the physical sense, right? But a strong reaction from a group. And so maybe if the opposite of love is not hatred but indifference, then we want all our initial drafts to invite some strong reactions, to have some element of failure, so that we can learn and iterate and move along from there. Something for us to think about, I guess, as we all go about refining our practice. Antonio.
Aaron, thanks for this question, because I am an engineer. I was a startupper in my first life. Before then, I became a politician, and I know how it's hard to achieve our dreams. I say to the young people that I meet that they have not fear for failure. Failure is a defeat to an opportunity. For me, is an idea to change the world. When I come to the school, I say to young people to be curious, always curious.
Yep.
And don't accept that things are as they are now. This is the first thing that I say to people and to young people that I meet. And I say, do everything you can to realize your dreams and your ambition. But if I think to my sector, to politicians, I say that everyone will have to a vision. And sometimes not so, and people have not a vision of the future. So when you have a vision, you can drive also the solution for your people. If you had not a vision, it will be a great problem. So curious and vision, that are the two big words that I want to share with you, because you can organize a better future only if you be curious and you have a vision.
Very cool. Thank you very much, Antonio, for that. And I'm glad that you talked about young people there in particular, because the organizer has asked all of us moderators to pick one of two questions to end off each of our panels. And the one that I picked for this panel is really about the next generation, right? It's about young people. What is your top piece of advice to the next generation of futurists? The ones who might be around in 2047 and not need driver's licenses, right, at that point. What would be the top piece of advice? And if I could ask you to do this in about 30 seconds each.
I repeat, to be curious.
All right, so stay curious, keep the vision going, right,
yes.
Keep that drive there where you can. Zainab?
I think I'd focus on the being of foresight rather than the doing of foresight. I think there's a lot of focus on methods and tools and all very, very important. But I think being humble, being curious, and I think those are the things that will eventually drive us. And I don't know how many people are talking about it, but I think we need to really talk more about who we are being and what we are bringing, what kind of energy, how are we showing up in the world on a daily basis, because it's almost like it's like the car. I think there's a doctoral quote on how driving in the dark, you can only see the 10 feet, right? And you just have to trust the rest of the destination. And when you can just see the next 10 feet, you have the responsibility and accountability of showing up in that in the best way possible so that the rest of it takes care of itself. So yes, to add to the curiosity, I'd say humility and accountability.
Brilliant. And being rather than doing. Great. And Ken?
Great. Building on curiosity, and humility, and accountability, I want to talk about something, overcoming fear. And by this, I mean that if by 2047, to use the horizon that you suggested, if foresight and futures hasn't yet become something that everybody has access to, then young futurists should make sure that it is democratized, without the fear that I see in the community these days of some people thinking that they will lose their jobs if everybody becomes a futurist or is futures literate. Because basic numeracy has not replaced the job of a mathematician. Basic literacy hasn't replaced the job of language and literature or reading experts. And I also do think that basic futures literacy will not take away the jobs of futures practitioners or foresight practitioners. So no fears.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to all three of you. It's always a bit of a peril when you moderate a panel that's as wonderful as this, because there's no way you can summarize all of the kind of takeaways and insights. But I'll just offer you one thought, right, as you go on into the rest of the program, because it's very early yet in this whole forum. We can think of the future in two ways, right? We can think of the future as F for fragmentation, U for uncertainty, T for tension and division, another U for unreadiness, R for being bogged down in realism, and E for everything coming at us all at once. Or we can think about the future as flexibility, understanding, coming together, bringing everyone together, as this panel has already talked about so much. The future is in everything because it's ubiquitous. A rhizomatic future, to go back to what Ken talked about, and a future that encompasses everyone, right? That is about diversity and democracy. And I really do think we have a choice which of those futures we choose. I guess it'll be up to us to think about how we put all of that, whether it's the first or the second future, into our practice. I wish you all luck, and I hope you'll all join me in thanking our wonderful panel today.